As the Second World War neared its end, the once mighty Third Reich began to crumble under the relentless pressure of Allied forces. Cities lay in ruins, the military was in chaos, and the Nazi leadership faced an inevitable reckoning. Much is known about the desperate fates of men like Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler. But what about their wives? These were the women who stood beside some of history's most infamous figures. Their lives, woven into the fabric of a collapsing regime, offer a unique and often unsettling perspective. What happened to them as the walls came crashing down? What consequences did they face in the aftermath of their husbands' fall from power? Stay with us as we uncover the untold stories of these women and their roles in one of history's darkest chapters. By 1945, Germany was in ruins, a stark contrast to the mighty empire Hitler had vowed to create. Allied forces closed in from all sides, tearing apart what was left of the Nazi war machine. Cities fell one by one, the front lines collapsed, and the Third Reich descended into chaos. High-ranking officials, once seemingly untouchable, were now fugitives. Some fled to remote mountain hideouts, while others donned disguises and tried to escape the country, knowing full well that capture meant trial, and likely a swift trip to the gallows. And what of their wives? These women who once basked in luxury and reveled in the power their husbands wielded were suddenly left behind. Their grand mansions and sprawling estates, symbols of their privilege, now stood as fragile shelters, constantly bombarded by air raids and threatened by advancing Allied troops. Many of these women had not only benefited from the regime, but had actively supported their husbands' ambitions, their wealth fueled by a system of oppression and genocide. But with the fall of the Reich, their insulated existence collapsed. For some, the end of the war signaled the start of a reckoning. Their former privilege turned into a burden as Allied investigators began probing into their roles within the regime. Others clung to stubborn denial, asserting they were ignorant of the atrocities that had unfolded around them. The world they had known, a world of Nazi grandeur and domination, was gone. They were left to face a stark, unforgiving reality. Their gilded cages had become prisons, and the price of their complicity was finally due. Eva Braun, Adolf Hitler's longtime companion, and in the end his wife, remains one of the most enigmatic figures within the Nazi inner circle. For much of her life, she existed in the shadows, carefully hidden from the public eye. Hitler, ever meticulous about his public image, believed the portrayal of a single, ascetic leader would enhance his appeal, particularly among women in Nazi Germany. This calculated facade kept Braun firmly in the background, despite her intimate and influential role in his personal life. Yet her loyalty to Hitler was unwavering, even as the Third Reich fell apart. By April 1945, with Soviet forces tightening their grip on Berlin and the war effectively lost, Braun made a fateful decision. She traveled to the Führer bunker, refusing to leave his side in what she knew were his final hours. On April 28, 1945, amidst the chaos of a collapsing regime, she and Hitler were married in a brief civil ceremony, witnessed by their closest confidants. This union, though fleeting, was a testament to her absolute devotion to the man she had dedicated her life to. The end came quickly and decisively. Less than 48 hours after their wedding, Eva Braun and Adolf Hitler were dead. She reportedly ingested cyanide, while Hitler ended his life with a self-inflicted gunshot. Their bodies were carried to the garden of the Reich Chancellery, hastily doused in petrol and set ablaze to prevent their desecration by advancing Soviet forces. And then, a final layer of intrigue. Braun's remains were never conclusively identified. Alleged dental fragments, discovered near the bunker, provided scant evidence. The final chapter of her life remains shrouded in mystery, a fitting conclusion for a figure who spent her days in the shadows of history. Margarete Himmler, the wife of Heinrich Himmler, SS leader and one of the architects of the Holocaust, started her life in a very different role, as a nurse during World War I. Her early career, rooted in compassion and service, seemed worlds apart from the life she would later embrace. But her marriage to Himmler in 1928 marked a dramatic turning point. United by shared interests in alternative medicine and occult mysticism, Margarete threw herself into the privileges that came with her husband's meteoric rise in the Nazi regime. They lived in opulent estates, their immense wealth built on the suffering and exploitation of millions. Beneath the surface, however, the facade of a supportive partnership began to crack. Himmler became increasingly distant, drawn to his private secretary and mistress, Hedwig Potthast. Yet Margarete remained loyal, though perhaps more to the ideology of the regime than to her husband. As the Allied forces closed in, bringing the Nazi Empire to its knees, she and their daughter Gudrun fled their home, abandoning the life of privilege they had once taken for granted. Her fall from grace was swift. Captured by American troops in May 1945, Margarete faced intense interrogation. Her diaries, laced with anti-Semitic rhetoric and an unwavering devotion to the Nazi cause, left no doubt about her complicity. Initially labeled a lesser offender during the denazification process, subsequent reviews reclassified her, reflecting the chilling depth of her ideological commitment. Stripped of voting rights and pensions, she spent her final years in quiet obscurity. Margarete Himmler died in 1967, a life once defined by privilege and power reduced to insignificance. Gerda Bormann, the wife of Martin Bormann, Hitler's powerful private secretary, was far from a passive figure in her husband's rise to influence. Married in 1929, Gerda didn't just support the Nazi regime, she embodied its most radical ideologies. Her unwavering conviction in the Nazi vision went beyond her husband's political career. Gerda personally advocated policies aimed at expanding the so-called Aryan race, making her a vocal and committed participant in the regime's ambitions. Her beliefs were nothing short of controversial, even by the extreme standards of Nazi Germany. She argued that monogamy was a barrier to the Reich's growth. Men, she claimed, should be allowed, no, encouraged, to father children with multiple women. And those women, obligated to bear at least 4 children each, all for the sake of strengthening Hitler's envisioned empire. It wasn't about family in the traditional sense. To Gerda, the family was a tool for nationalistic ambition, a means to an end. While Martin Bormann held enormous power within Hitler's inner circle, Gerda carved her own niche, promoting ideas that even many in the regime found radical. Polygamy, racial purity, population expansion, these weren't just abstract ideas to her, they were a mission. But as the Third Reich collapsed in 1945, Gerda's life of grandeur came to an abrupt end. She fled to South Tyrol, leaving behind the privileges of the Nazi elite. Stricken with uterine cancer, she spent her final months in a military hospital, passing away in 1946. Her 10 children, now orphans, were taken in by a priest. Gerda Bormann's legacy, however, lives on in her writings and beliefs, which paint a chilling portrait of a woman who actively embraced the regime's most extreme visions, sacrificing personal morality for a cause she believed was greater than herself. Magda Goebbels, the wife of the infamous propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, is remembered as one of the most chilling and disturbing figures among the Nazi elite. Born into privilege, she embodied the grace, ambition, and ruthless loyalty that Adolf Hitler sought in his inner circle. With her charisma and intelligence, Magda quickly rose to prominence, becoming not just the First Lady of National Socialism, but also a trusted confidant to Hitler himself. Her relationship with the dictator often placed her in a tense, unstable dynamic, caught between Hitler's influence and her possessive, jealous husband, Joseph. This delicate balance only solidified her position in the upper echelons of the Third Reich. As Germany collapsed in 1945, the Goebbels family retreated into the confining darkness of the Führer bunker. It was here, in those final, desperate days, that Magda committed an act so horrific it shocks the world even today. Convinced that life without Hitler and without National Socialism was unworthy of her children, she orchestrated their deaths with a level of precision that chills the soul. Morphine was injected to sedate her 6 young children, and then cyanide capsules were crushed in their mouths, ending their lives. These were not just her children. To her, they were symbols of a future now lost forever. Shortly after this unthinkable act, Magda and Joseph ended their own lives in the garden of the Reich Chancellery. Accounts differ on the details, but it is widely believed that Joseph shot Magda before turning the gun on himself. Their bodies were hastily burned, though only partially incinerated, and were later discovered by Soviet troops, a grim, charred testament to their fanatical loyalty. Magda Goebbels' final actions etched her name in infamy. She remains a haunting reminder of the dark extremes of ideological fanaticism and the devastating cost of blind loyalty to a collapsing empire. Lina Heydrich, the wife of Reinhard Heydrich, infamously known as the Butcher of Prague and one of the chief architects of the Holocaust, was a figure cloaked in controversy and unwavering loyalty. Born in 1911, Lina first met Heydrich at a rowing club in 1930. Their relationship was a whirlwind, fast, intense, and transformative. It was Lina who pushed Heydrich to join the SS, connecting him with Heinrich Himmler. This single decision placed her husband at the epicenter of one of history's most brutal regimes. Throughout their marriage, Lina was relentless in her support of Heydrich, even as his role in orchestrating mass atrocities became undeniable after his assassination by Czech resistance fighters in 1942. A daring and historic act that left the Nazi leadership in shock, Lina doubled down on her defense of his legacy. She rejected the truth of his central role in the Holocaust, instead portraying him in her memoirs as a misunderstood patriot devoted to his country. In the years following the war, Lina faced intense scrutiny. Tried in absentia as a war criminal by a Czech court, she was sentenced to life imprisonment. Yet somehow, she managed to avoid extradition. Lina found refuge in Germany, where she lived a relatively quiet life, operating a small inn on the island of Fehmarn. Despite her modest circumstances, she maintained a public image of defiance. Through her writings, she recast Heydrich as a victim of history, attempting to shift the narrative away from his horrific deeds. Unrepentant until her death in 1985, Lina Heydrich remained a chilling symbol of loyalty to evil. Her devotion to her husband, to Nazi ideology, and to a revisionist view of history served as a stark reminder of the enduring power of denial and ideological blindness. As the dust of the Second World War settled, the women married to the architects of the Nazi regime found themselves at a crossroads, caught between history and accountability. Their lives weave a complex web of privilege, complicity, and ideological blindness, exposing the far-reaching effects of totalitarianism. Figures like Eva Braun, forever linked to the enigmatic shadows of Adolf Hitler, leave historians questioning, how much did she really know? How deep was her involvement? Meanwhile, women like Margarete Himmler and Magda Goebbels stand out as stark symbols of unwavering loyalty to a regime responsible for unimaginable atrocities. Their devotion to the Nazi cause makes one thing clear: their ideological zeal was as much a driving force as their husbands' brutal actions. Post-war justice, however, arrived unevenly for these women. The denazification processes sought to categorize them, from major offenders to those who were exonerated. Their fates were anything but uniform. Some endured imprisonment, the loss of civil rights and public shame, stripped of the privileges they once wielded. Yet for others, the machinery of justice faltered. They slipped into obscurity, often retaining fragments of the wealth and status built on the suffering of millions. These stories are not mere footnotes in history, they are cautionary tales. They remind us of the quiet complicity that enables oppression and the human tendency to either participate or passively allow evil to flourish. Together, their lives underscore a haunting truth: that even ordinary individuals can become tools in some of history's darkest chapters. The fates of the Nazi wives force us to confront not just the actions of those in power, but the ripple effects of their influence. These women, mothers, wives, and at times ardent ideologues, shaped and sustained the regime in ways history cannot ignore. Their lives, steeped in privilege and tragedy, serve as stark reminders of the moral cost of complicity and the enduring power of ideology. Their choices, however silent or active, left an unforgettable mark on history. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Enter History. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated with our latest stories. Goodbye, and seeing you next time.